Doomsvince, and this is day 60 of Spawn Year.
Today, two comic books popped up out of the open grave. One was the comic that comes with the Spawnmobile, the single silliest toy Doomsvince has given me all year, and I must already be losing it a little. I haven't been able to stop playing with it since I got it. Hey, I wonder what flies farther, the skull on the back of the car or Overkill's head? Despite all the laughs I had with the other figure comics, this one really takes the cake. It's Spawn vs. Overkill, who Spawn takes out with the completely unexplained, overly decaled Spawnmobile to showcase all the features of the toy. And I finally got to see something I've been hoping for weeks. Overkill's head shooting off his body in the panel of a comic book. I didn't care what happened after that. I wasn't going to let anything ruin my day. And I love how brooding the comic tries to be even after Spawn uses a souped-up race car to beat up a supervillain. It will take much more to erase the darkness in his soul. The only thing that could have made this better would have been the Spawn clock. Conjuring your own race car with gun turrets that pop out costs 5 units of energy. I quickly wished that was the only item up for review today. The second comic was from the board game. Oh no. This wasn't just about comics, I realized. This was about my losing condition when I played the Spawn Super Nintendo game 10 days ago. Doomsvince said I would have to play a game against him. This must be it. On the other side of the comic are the instructions for the game. I can never be sure of anything in this graveyard, but my instincts told me I'd better study these rules. He didn't give me any when I played the video game. The comic is another cartoonish battle, Spawn versus a Violator-esque monster that talks like Scooby-Doo. Spawn beats him the same way he beats Overkill in the other comic I read today. He just runs him down with a Spawnmobile. He doesn't even need guns or a big skull projectile this time. This version of Spawn is hilarious. That car is his answer to everything. I'm just imagining Spawn hiding it under a bunch of trash in the alley and getting it stolen from him when he's not looking. So then I read the instructions for the board game, without having the actual game in front of me. These rules are just as convoluted and overwritten as the worst issues of the comic have been. Isn't it standard practice to mention the object of the game before jumping right into Step 1, move the Violator? Before I even know why I'm doing anything, I'm treated to a list of steps for each turn, and then a detailed explanation of the rules for each step. It looks really complicated. You're playing cards to the game board to create pages of 8-page stories, rolling dice to determine how far you can move, using chips to add powers to your roll, and moving Violator based on the number of Violator heads you roll. Whenever Violator comes into play, there's a card that does that, and I swear the instructions never explain where you're supposed to put them. This is not a game that required 4 pages of explanation. There are 4 8-page paths connected together on the board. When you get all the way around, back to your own spot, you win the game. You play pages from a story on the board. Once one page is played, only pages from that story can be added to that path. What the stories are is inconsequential. The cards are just shrunken copies of pages from the comic, and you can't read them without a magnifying glass. And by this point, I've read all of these. It's not really worth it. The only information that matters is the number of Spawn icons on a card. That tells you how many you need to roll to land there. If, for example, you roll 4 power and the next 2 spaces cost 2 power each, you move forward 2 spaces. The rule I had to read 18 times before I understood it is about re-rolling. It only seems complicated because the rules don't tell you what the power points are for until after it explains how you get them. It probably would have been more constructive if I'd read the rules backwards. Whether you play a page to the board or you discard something determines how many dice you throw. You get more for pages. If you roll Spawn icons, those count towards your power for the turn. You can re-roll up to the number of Spawn icons you rolled. But if you re-roll and get any Violators, you forfeit all the power you've accumulated and you've got nothing. You also have to remember to move Violator every time a Violator icon comes up, which is irritating, but the game is so monotonous, it was nice to be forced to focus on something I had to do. If Violator lands on you, you go back to the start of that story. There are also special cards that add points to spaces with overkill, send you forward faster, change how many dice you roll, etc. As I expected, Doomsvince arrived a few hours later, all smiles, ready to challenge me to what he called a thrilling bout. It turns out he had no idea what he was in for. He hadn't read the rules himself, and he sent me the instructions ahead of time so I would have to teach him. The second comic he sent me today was just a misdirection, to lead me to believe all I was to review today were comics about the Spawnmobile. If I hadn't noticed and studied the rules, I would have forfeited the match. As with the Super Nintendo game, there would be a prize if I was victorious and a penalty if I was not. If I defeated Doomsvince, he would finally allow me any single inanimate object to keep in the graveyard for the remainder of Spawn Year. It had to be something I personally owned. Oh God, was he in my real house? And it had to be the very first thing that came to mind. Oh God, can he read my thoughts? I instantly concentrated, focusing on a photograph of my wife and son. More than anything else, I wanted to see their faces. And if I lost, my penalty would be losing every Spawn item I currently have in the graveyard. The sketchpad, the iPod, the action figures, everything. As sick as I am of Spawn stuff, if I don't have all of that, I'm looking at some gravestones and the corpse of a jacket that hated the very Spawn stuff that wouldn't be here anymore. If he was being honest, his prize was priceless and his penalty sadistic. So once again, I accepted Doomsvince's challenge. We chose our pieces. Spawns were the only selection. Story of my life. Doomsvince chose Medieval Spawn because it has the word evil in it. I really think he thinks that's how you spell it. And I picked Commando Spawn because he looked like he wanted to punch someone in the face, and I can sympathize. He's supposed to hold a gun, but he's appropriately incompetent. We drew our 4 cards and Doomsvince played first because he's younger than me. Little known fact. The game unfolded in as dull a way as possible. Neither of us drew well, and neither of us rolled well. And when a game hinges so much on luck, there's not much to do but wait around and hope yours improves before your opponent's does. There is a small bit of strategy in when to re-roll to increase your power level, when to play extra power chips, and mostly placing cards with higher power requirements for advancement where they'll stall your opponent, and lower cost cards where they'll move you forward faster. But it's all so simple and straightforward that there's never more than 1 or 2 possible choices. What made our game especially dull was nearly only drawing cards that couldn't be played to the board because that story wasn't out. Those are just discarded and you throw fewer dice. So even though most of the spaces on the board were costing 2 power, or when we placed covers, no power at all, the odds of rolling more than 1 or 2 Spawn icons was low enough we were looking about as in a hurry to get anything done as Spawn himself. This is how it should have been in the comics. It costs Spawn energy just to walk forward. That's why he so rarely accomplishes anything. We were neck and neck through the first quarter, but trust me, this was no horse race. Play a card, roll, get a 2 or 3, move forward 1 space, repeat. Sometimes one of us would get a special card or waste an energy chip and get a little further. Doomsvince was livid when Violator came out and caught up to him, putting him 4 or 5 spaces behind, and I got the feeling he was already frustrated that this wasn't the epic battle he had anticipated. As the monotony wore on, he began drifting off, and I had to get his attention and remind him to take his turn several times. About 45 minutes in, he started losing on purpose, just to get the thing over with, missing opportunities to advance or set me back intentionally as I pulled ahead and inched closer to the finish line. I had had enough myself. Nothing was more torturous than the sheer mediocrity of this quick cash-in piece of merchandising. There wasn't even much care from Pressman put into the design, reprinting comic pages for cards, non-painted figures, but I didn't care. So far, Spawn Year has been a series of humiliating defeat after humiliating defeat. Even when I thought I'd won, I always lost. This is Doomsvince's game room, and the cards have been stacked against me from the beginning. But this time, Doomsvince didn't count on getting caught in the web of missed opportunities and poor planning that makes up so much of the world of Spawn, its strands stretching all the way to this ill-considered board game. I was ready for the potential suckage. I fought through the boredom, and I won this one. Finally, I beat him. Begrudgingly, Doomsvince was obliged to honor the terms of our match. I closed my eyes and concentrated. I didn't think of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Doomsvince had promised me the first thing I owned that came to mind, and when I opened my eyes, I was holding Mountain Dew.